The Oak Ridge Estates neighborhood had been my home for nearly 12 years. We moved here when Jason was just 5 years old, after his mother passed away from cancer. The tree-lined streets and well-maintained houses represented everything I wanted for my son: stability, safety, and a place to grow up without worrying about the dangers of the world outside our community gates. Our days followed a comfortable routine. I would wake early, prepare breakfast while Jason showered, and we would eat together before I drove him to school. Afternoons often found us in the driveway, playing basketball or working on his pitching form for baseball season. Weekends were for hiking in the nearby state park or having neighbors over for barbecues. The HOA fees seemed reasonable for the maintained common areas and the security of a gated community. We had built a good life here, just the two of us. Jason had grown into a thoughtful teenager, getting solid grades and showing real talent on the baseball team. I would catch myself watching him sometimes, seeing shadows of his mother in his smile, hoping I was doing right by both of them. Our home was our sanctuary, and I had always felt we belonged here. The first sign that something was changing came on a Tuesday morning in early spring. I was backing out of my driveway when an unfamiliar black SUV with community security, emblazoned on the side, pulled up across the street. Two men in dark blue uniforms emerged and approached Mrs. Henderson, who was tending to her front garden. From my rearview mirror, I could see her expression shift from confusion to concern as they gestured at her rose bushes. When I returned home that evening, Jason mentioned seeing the same vehicle circling the neighborhood multiple times during the day. "They were taking pictures of houses, Dad," he said, his fork pausing midway to his mouth during dinner, "including ours." Over the next few weeks, these security personnel became a constant presence. They wore uniforms that resembled police officers, complete with badges, utility belts, and what appeared to be holstered weapons. The resemblance to actual law enforcement was uncanny, except for subtle differences that my years working in corporate security allowed me to notice: no jurisdiction markings, generic badge designs, and an overall lack of professionalism in their demeanor. At the quarterly HOA meeting, I was surprised to see 3 of these security officers standing at the back of the room, arms crossed, surveying the residents like prison guards monitoring inmates. Our HOA president, Richard Blackwell, a retired businessman who had moved in 2 years ago, stood at the podium with unusual confidence. "As you have all noticed, we have enhanced our community security measures," he announced, gesturing toward the uniformed men. "This has necessitated an increase in HOA dues, effective immediately. An additional $150 per month will ensure our neighborhood remains the safest in the county." The room filled with murmurs of discontent, but no one openly objected. I raised my hand, waiting to be acknowledged. When Blackwell finally nodded in my direction, I stood. "I have some questions about this security team," I said, keeping my voice even. "What company are they from? What are their qualifications? And do they actually have authority to enforce HOA regulations?" The room fell silent. Blackwell's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. Oak Ridge Security Partners is fully vetted and certified. They have all necessary credentials to ensure compliance with our community guidelines. "But specifically," I pressed, "do they have any actual legal authority? Because from what I understand, HOA regulations are civil matters, not criminal ones." The head of security, a tall man with a military-style haircut and cold eyes, stepped forward. "We operate under full contractual authority from the HOA board. Any resident who impedes our duties is in violation of the covenant they signed when purchasing property here." His stare locked onto mine, a silent warning that made my skin crawl. Around me, neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes downcast. Mrs. Peterson, who lived across the street from me, gently tugged at my sleeve, silently urging me to sit down. I remained standing. "I would like to see documentation of this authority," I said, "and the board vote that approved this expense." Blackwell cleared his throat. "We can address individual concerns after the meeting. Now, moving on to landscaping guidelines." As the meeting continued, I felt the weight of stares from both the security team and several board members. When it ended, I approached Blackwell, but he was quickly surrounded by his inner circle of board members who formed a barrier between us. The message was clear: questions were not welcome. Walking to my car, I overheard two neighbors whispering. "Just do what they say," one murmured. "The Millers questioned them last month, and now they are getting citations every other day." I drove home with a growing sense of unease. Something was very wrong in our once peaceful community, and I seemed to be the only one willing to say it aloud. That night, I sat on our back porch, watching the security vehicle slowly cruise past our house for the third time, and knew that by speaking up, I had placed a target on our backs. Sleep did not come easily that night. After Jason went to bed, I opened my laptop and began researching homeowners association regulations and enforcement limitations. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions. HOA security personnel had no more legal authority than any private citizen. They could not detain people, issue fines on the spot, or carry weapons under the guise of enforcing community guidelines. What was happening in our neighborhood went far beyond the bounds of legitimate HOA enforcement. I printed documents outlining the legal limitations of homeowners associations, highlighting relevant sections about enforcement procedures. The more I read, the more certain I became that these officers were operating without proper certification or authority. Their presence was not about community safety. It was about control and intimidation. The next morning, as I sipped coffee on the front porch before work, I watched one of the security vehicles park across the street. The officer inside appeared to be photographing my house. When he noticed me watching, he drove away without acknowledgement. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jason. "Those security guys just stopped Mrs. Abernathy and made her pay a fine for her garbage can being visible from the street." Later that afternoon, Jason came bursting through the front door, his face flushed with anger. "Dad, you need to see what happened," he said, pulling me toward the window. Outside, our elderly neighbor Mr. Collins was standing in his driveway, visibly shaking as two security officers loomed over him. One of them was jabbing a finger at the American flag hanging from Mr. Collins' porch. "They told him flags are only permitted on designated holidays now," Jason explained. "Mr. Collins told them he was a veteran and had every right to fly the flag. Then they threatened to put a lien on his house if he did not pay a $500 fine right now." I grabbed my phone and began recording as I walked across the street. Mr. Collins, who had served in Vietnam and lived alone since his wife died, looked close to tears. The security officers turned as I approached, their hands moving to rest on their utility belts in a subtle threat. "Is there a problem here?" I asked, keeping my phone visible. The taller officer stepped toward me. "This is not your concern, sir. Return to your property." "Mr. Collins is my neighbor and friend," I replied. "And I am curious about this new flag regulation, since federal law explicitly protects the right of homeowners to display the American flag." The officer narrowed his eyes at my phone. "Recording security personnel is prohibited under community guidelines. Delete that footage immediately." "Actually," I said, continuing to record, "there is no such guideline. I have read them all quite thoroughly, and your vehicles lack proper markings required for private security companies in this state." The second officer moved closer to his partner, muttering something I could not hear. After a tense moment, they returned to their vehicle without another word to either Mr. Collins or me. As they drove away, I captured their license plate, another violation, as it was a personal plate rather than a commercial one required for security vehicles. Mr. Collins grasped my arm with a trembling hand. "They have been watching my house," he whispered. "Last week they came inside claiming they needed to inspect my backyard for violations. I did not know I could refuse." That evening, I compiled my growing evidence: photos of their unmarked vehicles, recordings of interactions, and documentation of regulations they had invented. I created a spreadsheet tracking patrol patterns, noting they focused particular attention on homes of residents who had questioned the HOA board or who lived alone. The confrontation came 3 days later. I was mowing my lawn when a security vehicle pulled into my driveway, blocking me in. The head of security, who had stared me down at the HOA meeting, approached with a citation pad in hand. "Your grass exceeds the 3-inch height limitation," he stated flatly. "That will be $200, payable immediately." I turned off the mower. I am currently in the process of cutting it, as you can see. The violation has already been logged. Payment is due now, or it increases to $300 by tomorrow. I stood my ground. I will not be paying any fine today. If the HOA wishes to issue a formal violation notice through proper channels, they can mail it to me, and I will address it through the appeals process outlined in our covenants. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You are making a mistake. We know all about you and your son. It would be unfortunate if your continued noncompliance resulted in complications for both of you." My blood ran cold at the implied threat. "Are you threatening my family?" "I am advising you of potential consequences. Some residents find compliance easier than resistance." He placed the citation on my mower handle and walked away, but not before adding, "We will be watching." That night, as I was taking out the trash, my neighbor Tom approached cautiously from his yard. "I saw what happened earlier," he said, glancing nervously down the street. "You need to be careful. The Richardsons on Oak Lane questioned them last month. 2 days later, their car windows were smashed. When police came, the security team provided evidence that local teenagers were responsible, but everyone knows better." I thanked him for the warning, my resolve hardening. That same evening, I ordered security cameras for every entry point of our home and motion-activated lights for the perimeter. As I installed them the following weekend, I noticed the security vehicle parked across the street, watching my every move. When night fell, I closed all the blinds and showed Jason how to access the camera feeds from his phone. "Are we in danger, Dad?" he asked, his teenage bravado momentarily giving way to genuine concern. I placed my hands on his shoulders, wanting to reassure him but unwilling to lie. "I hope not. But something is not right with these people, and until we figure it out, we need to be extra careful." The security cameras were my silent witnesses, recording as security vehicles drove past our house with increasing frequency. I was no longer just suspicious. I was certain we were being targeted, and I was equally certain that whatever was happening in our neighborhood went far beyond overzealous HOA enforcement. The evening started like any other. I was preparing dinner while Jason finished his homework at the kitchen table. The spring air was comfortable enough to have the windows open, and the sound of a basketball bouncing on concrete drifted in from outside. I glanced at the clock, 7:45 p.m. "Dad, I am going to shoot some hoops before dinner," Jason called out, already heading for the door. Just for 15 minutes. I nodded, stirring the pasta sauce. Dinner will be ready at 8:30. Do not forget to turn on the driveway lights. Through the kitchen window, I could see Jason dribbling the basketball, taking shots at the hoop mounted above our garage. The rhythm of the bouncing ball was comforting, a normal sound in a neighborhood that had begun to feel increasingly abnormal. The security patrols had intensified over the past week, with vehicles circling our block hourly rather than daily. The screeching of tires shattered the peaceful evening. I looked up to see two black security vehicles converging on our driveway, effectively boxing Jason in. The sound of the basketball stopped abruptly. I dropped the wooden spoon and moved quickly toward the front door, a knot forming in my stomach. "Dad," Jason called out, his voice tight with tension. By the time I reached the front porch, two security officers had already approached Jason, standing uncomfortably close to him. One of them, a heavy-set man with a shaved head, was gesturing aggressively at the basketball. "Recreational activities are prohibited after 7:30 p.m. according to updated community guidelines," he stated loudly, clearly ensuring I could hear from the porch. "Identification, please." Jason stood his ground, the basketball clutched against his chest. "I live here. This is my driveway." The second officer moved closer. "Identification now, or we will consider this trespassing." "He is 16 years old," I said firmly, walking down the porch steps toward them. "He does not need to provide ID on his own property, and there is no 7:30 curfew in our HOA guidelines." Both officers turned toward me, their stances shifting subtly into more aggressive postures. The head officer, the same one who had threatened me over the lawn, emerged from one of the vehicles. "The board approved updated noise restrictions last week," he said smoothly. "All residents were notified electronically." "No such notification was sent," I replied, moving to stand beside Jason. "And you have no authority to demand identification from residents, especially minors. I would like you to leave our property now." The head officer smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Interference with security personnel is a direct violation of community safety protocols. That carries a $500 fine, immediately payable. I felt Jason tense beside me. "Dad, they cannot do this, right?" "No, they cannot," I stated loudly, making sure my voice carried to neighboring houses where lights were coming on as people noticed the confrontation. "These men have no legal authority to enforce any regulations, collect any fines, or demand identification. They are private security contractors only." The head officer stepped closer, his hand resting on his belt near what looked disturbingly like a holster. "Mr. Mitchell, your continued obstruction is being documented. The board will review your case for possible eviction proceedings." "Eviction?" I laughed incredulously. "The HOA does not have the power to evict homeowners. That requires court proceedings." His expression darkened. "You would be surprised what we can do." By now, several neighbors had emerged onto their porches, watching silently. The security officers noticed the growing audience and the phones some neighbors were holding up, presumably recording. "This incident is not over," the head officer said quietly, his voice now just above a whisper. "We know when your son walks home from school. We know when he is alone. A lot can happen in a quiet neighborhood like this." Ice filled my veins at the explicit threat to my child. "Are you threatening my son?" He did not answer, merely smiled again before signaling to his men. They returned to their vehicles and drove away slowly, deliberately. The entire encounter had lasted less than 10 minutes, but it had changed everything. Inside the house, Jason's hands were shaking as he set the basketball down. "Dad, what is happening? Can they really hurt us?" I pulled him into a hug, something he had recently grown too teenage cool to accept regularly. This time, he did not pull away. "No one is going to hurt you, I promise." Even as I said the words, I was not entirely sure I could keep that promise. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the actual police department. The officer behind the desk looked bored as I recounted the previous night's events. "Sounds like an HOA dispute to me," he said, barely looking up from his computer. "Civil matter, not criminal." "They threatened my son," I insisted, "and they are impersonating law enforcement with their uniforms and badges." The officer sighed. "Unless they explicitly claim to be police officers, it is not impersonation. As for the threat, it sounds vague enough that it would be your word against theirs." I left the police station with a growing suspicion that either the police were incompetent or, worse, somehow connected to whatever was happening in our neighborhood. That evening, I sat down with Jason to discuss our options. "Maybe we should move," he suggested, pushing his dinner around his plate. "Find another neighborhood." I considered it seriously. That would mean selling the house, finding a new place, changing your school. It is a lot of disruption, and honestly, running away does not feel right. Whatever these people are doing, it is wrong, and someone needs to stand up to them. Jason looked up, his expression a mix of fear and determination that reminded me so much of his mother. "Then we stand up to them. Together." That night, I began reaching out to local news outlets, sending emails detailing the situation in our neighborhood. Most went unanswered, but one local reporter responded with interest, asking for any documentation I could provide. I stayed up late compiling evidence, including video from our security cameras showing the frequency of patrols past our house. The next day, I noticed a news van driving slowly through the neighborhood. Within an hour, 2 security vehicles parked directly in front of it, blocking its path until it eventually left. The message was clear: outside scrutiny was not welcome here. That night, I doubled the number of security cameras around our property and showed Jason alternate routes to walk home from school. We established check-in protocols and safe words. Measures I never imagined taking in our suburban neighborhood were now necessary. As we finished securing the house for the night, I caught Jason looking out the window at the security vehicle that had been parked across the street for hours. "We are not going to let them win," I told him firmly. "Whatever they are doing, whatever this is about, we will figure it out and stop it." Jason nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the dark vehicle outside our home. "Just be careful, Dad. I have got a bad feeling about these guys." I did not tell him that I shared his feeling, that the pit in my stomach grew deeper every day. Instead, I assured him everything would be fine, even as I checked the locks on our doors a third time before going to bed. Thursday afternoon brought unseasonably warm weather for spring. I was in my home office on a conference call with clients when my phone vibrated with a text from Jason. "Walking home now. Be there in 15. Our new routine, he would text when leaving school and again when arriving home. Simple precautions that had become necessary. I continued my meeting, glancing occasionally at the time. 15 minutes passed, then 20. At the 30-minute mark, unease turned to worry. I texted Jason, "Home yet?" No response. I excused myself from the call and tried calling his phone. Straight to voicemail. Not like him at all. The security camera feed showed no activity at our front door or driveway. I grabbed my car keys, trying to quell the rising panic. Just as I reached the front door, my phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello," I answered quickly. "Mr. Mitchell, a woman's voice shaking. "This is Helen from across the street from Maple Park. Your son. You need to come quickly. The security guards, they hurt him." My world collapsed into a tunnel of fear as I sprinted to my car. The drive that should have taken 5 minutes felt like hours. I screeched to a halt at Maple Park, the small green space 3 blocks from our house that Jason often cut through on his walk home. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. They parted as I ran up, revealing Jason lying on the ground, his face contorted in pain. His arms were bent at unnatural angles, one clearly broken above the wrist, the other at the elbow. Blood seeped through his school shirt. "I called an ambulance," Helen said, her hand on my shoulder. "They should be here any minute." I dropped to my knees beside Jason, afraid to touch him for fear of causing more pain. "Jason, I am here. What happened? Who did this?" His eyes were unfocused with pain. "Security guys stopped me, said I was trespassing in the park." His breath came in short gasps. "I started recording them with my phone. They grabbed it, twisted my arm when I tried to get it back." White-hot rage burned through my chest. "The same men from our driveway." He nodded weakly. "The big one said, 'This was a warning to you.'" Helen stepped closer. I saw it from my window. 2 security officers approached him in the park. When he took out his phone, they became violent. One of them twisted his arm until we all heard it break. When he screamed, the other one grabbed his other arm and did the same thing. It was deliberate, like they wanted to make sure both arms were broken. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the murmuring crowd. Someone handed me Jason's backpack, recovered from where it had fallen. His phone was nowhere to be found. "They took his phone?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Helen nodded. "After they hurt him, they grabbed the phone and left in their vehicle. I got the license plate." She handed me a slip of paper. "I took photos too, but they were wearing sunglasses and hats, almost like they knew what they were going to do." The paramedics arrived, gently moving me aside to attend to Jason. I watched, numb with shock and rage, as they stabilized his arms and loaded him onto a stretcher. His face was pale, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. As they lifted him into the ambulance, our eyes met, and I saw something there that broke my heart. Fear, yes, but also shame, as if he had somehow failed me. "I am coming with you," I told the paramedics, climbing into the ambulance beside him. I held his hand, the only part of him I could safely touch, during the ride to the hospital, whispering promises that everything would be okay, that I would make this right, that he was safe now. The hospital was a blur of forms, questions, and medical terminology. X-rays confirmed what was visibly obvious: multiple fractures in both arms. "These injuries are consistent with significant force application," the doctor explained, pointing to the images. "The pattern suggests deliberate actions rather than accidental injury. I am required to report suspected assault to the authorities." The police officers who arrived took statements with professional detachment. When I mentioned the HOA security team, their expressions changed subtly. "You are suggesting private security personnel deliberately assaulted a minor?" one officer asked skeptically. "Do you have any evidence of this?" "There are multiple witnesses," I replied. "One has photographs. The park may have surveillance cameras. My son was attempting to record the interaction on his phone, which they stole." The officer made notes without comment. "We will look into it. In the meantime, do not approach these individuals yourself if you see them again." As they left, I overheard one say to the other, "Another Oak Ridge Estates complaint. Blackwell is not going to like this." Jason required surgery to properly set the multiple fractures. I sat in the waiting room, alternating between crushing worry and burning anger. Helen had texted me the photos she took, grainy images showing two uniformed men standing over a figure on the ground. Not clear enough to identify faces, but unmistakably the same uniforms worn by our neighborhood security. When I was finally allowed to see Jason after surgery, both his arms were in casts from fingers to above the elbows. He was groggy from pain medication, his eyes struggling to focus on my face. "Dad," he murmured, "I tried to get away. I did what you said, stayed in public view, but they came anyway." I stroked his hair gently. "This is not your fault, not at all. You did nothing wrong." "They said," he swallowed painfully, "they said next time they would break my legs, that you needed to stop asking questions." The doctor entered before I could respond, explaining the extent of the injuries, the recovery process, the physical therapy that would be necessary. "Both arms will require casts for at least 6 weeks. He will need significant assistance with daily activities during that time." Later that night, as Jason finally slept thanks to pain medication, I stood at the window of his hospital room looking out at the city lights. My son, my only family, lay broken because I had dared to question authority. The police seemed uninterested at best, complicit at worst. There would be no help from that quarter. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to hate, to truly want to destroy another human being. The men who had hurt my son deserved no mercy, no understanding. And the people behind them, Blackwell and whoever else was involved in this corrupt security operation, they deserved to be exposed and ruined. I returned to Jason's bedside, watching the rise and fall of his chest. They had taken so much from him, his security, his independence, even his ability to feed himself or use the bathroom without help. Months of his life would be consumed by pain and recovery. His baseball season was over before it began, all to send me a message. As dawn broke over the hospital, my resolve hardened into something cold and implacable. I had tried to follow the rules, reporting concerns to the HOA board, filing police reports, reaching out to media. None of it had protected my son. Now it was time for a different approach. I gently squeezed Jason's shoulder as he began to stir. "I am going to make this right," I promised him, "whatever it takes." The next few days were a haze of hospital visits, medication schedules, and preparing our home for Jason's return. I set up his bedroom downstairs in the former home office, installed support rails in the bathroom, and purchased adaptive equipment to help him maintain some independence despite having both arms immobilized. Throughout it all, a cold determination drove me forward. Late at night, after Jason had finally fallen asleep under the influence of pain medication, I would retreat to what had become my command center. The dining room table covered with printouts, legal documents, and my laptop. The security cameras I had installed around our property had captured partial footage of the security vehicle that followed Jason the day of the attack. It was not enough to identify the individual officers, but it confirmed the vehicle belonged to the same company patrolling our neighborhood. I began searching public records for information about Oak Ridge Security Partners, the company supposedly providing our neighborhood security. What I found was troubling. The company had been incorporated just 6 months earlier, with minimal paperwork and a registered address that turned out to be a mail drop. Further digging revealed the company had no state licensing, no insurance filings, and no legitimate business presence. It was a shell, nothing more. Cross-referencing the vehicle registrations led me to another company, Blackwell Holdings LLC. The connection was clear. Our HOA president was directly tied to the security company. More disturbing were the names I found associated with the LLC. 3 of the 5 were convicted felons with records including extortion, assault, and racketeering. One had served time for impersonating a police officer. I created a detailed chart connecting all the players, pinning it to the wall and adding to it as I uncovered more information. The pattern was becoming clear. Blackwell and his associates had established the security company as a way to intimidate residents and extract money through fabricated violations and on-the-spot fines. The increased HOA fees were likely being funneled through the security contract directly into their pockets. The next morning, I contacted James Reynolds, an attorney specializing in HOA law who had been recommended by a colleague. At his office, I laid out everything I had discovered. "This is deeply concerning," Reynolds said, reviewing my documentation. "What we have here appears to be a criminal enterprise operating under the guise of homeowners association enforcement. The assault on your son elevates this beyond civil matters into criminal territory." "The police seem reluctant to investigate," I replied. "I filed reports about the threats before the attack and about the assault itself, but there has been minimal follow-up." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, that does not surprise me. We have seen cases where these private security operations have connections within local law enforcement. Former colleagues, family members, or simply financial arrangements that discourage scrutiny." "So what can we do?" I asked. "We build a case that is too solid to ignore," he said. "Gather testimonies from other residents who have been intimidated or extorted. Document every illegal action. Create a paper trail so comprehensive that even reluctant authorities cannot dismiss it." That evening, I began reaching out to neighbors. Most were initially hesitant, doors barely opening when I knocked, conversations ending abruptly if security vehicles drove by. But gradually, people began to talk. Mrs. Henderson had paid over $2,000 in fake landscaping violations. The Rodriguez family had been threatened with deportation investigations, despite being legal citizens for 3 generations. Mr. Collins had been forced to allow inspections of his home multiple times, during which items had disappeared. One by one, I recorded their stories, building a collective testimony of intimidation and extortion. Several neighbors provided copies of fraudulent citations, receipts for on-the-spot payments, and recordings of threatening encounters. What emerged was a pattern of systematic exploitation targeting particularly vulnerable residents, the elderly, single parents, and those living alone. When I returned home after collecting these testimonies, I found a security vehicle parked directly across from my house, headlights off but engine running, a clear message that I was being watched. I stared directly at the windshield as I walked to my front door, refusing to show fear even as my heart raced. Inside, I checked on Jason, who was finally sleeping comfortably in his new downstairs bedroom setup. The sight of both his arms in casts made the fury rise in my throat again. These people had hurt my child, threatened to do worse, and were now openly surveilling our home. The legal process might eventually bring them to justice, but it would be slow, and in the meantime, we remained vulnerable. That night, I made a decision I never thought I would make. I drove to a gun store in the next county, where no one would recognize me. The AR-15 felt foreign in my hands as the shop owner explained its features. I had never owned a gun before, had never wanted to. But the image of Jason lying broken on the sidewalk overrode any hesitation. I completed the background check, waited the required period, and returned to take possession of the rifle and several boxes of ammunition. At home, I assembled it according to the manual, loaded it, and placed it in a new gun safe installed in my bedroom closet. The combination was known only to me. The surveillance of our home intensified. Security vehicles now parked outside for hours at a time, sometimes with 2 officers inside watching our house. I documented every instance with time-stamped photographs and video from our security cameras. When they realized my cameras were recording them, they began parking just at the edge of the camera range, but still visible from the windows. The attorney called with an update. We have enough for a solid civil case against both the HOA board and the security company. I have also compiled enough evidence to warrant a criminal investigation. I am submitting everything to the county prosecutor's office tomorrow morning. How long before any action is taken? I asked. Hard to say. The wheels of justice move slowly, especially if there are connections we do not know about. It could be weeks before we see any official response. Weeks during which we would remain under threat. Weeks during which the people who had hurt Jason would remain free to do worse. The thought was unbearable. That night, as I checked the locks for the 3rd time, I noticed 2 security vehicles parked on our street, one at each end, effectively blocking any exit by car. The message was unmistakable. We were trapped, under siege in our own home. I checked the security camera feeds one last time before going to bed, the AR-15 now stored in a locked cabinet within reach of my bed. Sleep did not come easily. Every sound from outside, car engines, voices, footsteps on pavement, jolted me awake. Around 3 in the morning, I finally drifted into restless sleep, only to be awakened an hour later by a notification from our security system. Someone was in the backyard. The security alert pulled me from sleep instantly. I reached for my phone, pulling up the camera feed to see 2 shadowy figures moving along the side of our house, approaching the back door. They wore the now familiar dark uniforms of the HOA security team, but with baseball caps pulled low and what appeared to be balaclavas covering the lower portions of their faces. One carried what looked like a pry bar. My blood ran cold as I watched them test the back door handle. This was no legitimate security patrol. This was a home invasion. I moved silently to Jason's downstairs bedroom, gently shaking him awake. "Dad, what is it?" he mumbled, still groggy from pain medication. "We have visitors," I said quietly. "I need you to lock this door behind me and call 911. Can you manage that with your casts?" His eyes widened with understanding. He nodded, now fully awake. "Be careful, Dad." I helped him sit up, placing his phone where he could reach it with his fingers that extended from his cast. "Remember, lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or the police." I closed his door, hearing the lock click behind me, and moved quickly to my bedroom. The gun safe opened with a quiet beep as I entered the combination. The AR-15 felt heavy in my hands, unfamiliar yet necessary. I checked that it was loaded properly, just as I had practiced, and moved toward the back of the house. Through the kitchen window, I could see them working on the back door lock with professional efficiency. The pry bar wedged into the door frame as the second man prepared what looked like a small battering ram. They were not even trying to be subtle anymore. I positioned myself at the end of the hallway leading to the kitchen, giving me a clear line of sight to the back door while keeping distance between us. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline making my hands shake slightly. I took a deep breath to steady myself, remembering what was at stake. My son, injured and vulnerable, was counting on me. The back door splintered inward with a crash that seemed to shake the entire house. 2 figures burst in, flashlights sweeping across the kitchen. I raised the rifle to my shoulder, aiming at the center of the doorway. "Stop right there," I commanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "I am armed and I have called the police." Their flashlights swung toward me, momentarily blinding me with the glare. As my eyes adjusted, I recognized the head of security, the same man who had threatened us at the HOA meeting and on our driveway. His partner was one of the men who had been with him during those confrontations. "Mr. Mitchell," the head of security said, his voice unnervingly calm, "we are conducting a property inspection as authorized by the HOA covenant. Put down the weapon and step aside." At 4 a.m, with masks and a pry bar, I kept the rifle trained on them. "You are trespassing in my home. Leave now." The second man moved his hand toward his waistband. I noticed for the first time that both were wearing holsters. "We have full authority to enter any property in this community," he stated. "Interference with HOA security personnel is grounds for immediate property seizure." "You have no legal authority whatsoever," I replied. "You broke into my home. My son is a witness, and every second of this is being recorded on our security system." The head of security took a step forward. "Where is your son? We have some unfinished business with him. Perhaps we should check on him." The casual threat to Jason made something snap inside me. Take one more step toward my son's room, and I will consider it a direct threat to his life. You have already assaulted him once. It will not happen again. Both men exchanged glances, then the head of security slowly reached for his weapon. "You are not going to shoot anyone. You do not have it in you. Now put that thing down before someone gets hurt." I fired a warning shot into the floor between us. The sound was deafening in the confined space of the hallway, the muzzle flash momentarily lighting up the dark house. "That was a warning," I said, ears ringing from the gunshot. "The next one will not be. Get out of my house now." Their expressions changed from confident to uncertain. They backed toward the broken door, the head of security raising his hand slightly. "This was a mistake, Mitchell. You have no idea what you have just done." "I know exactly what I have done," I replied. "I have defended my home and my family from intruders. Now leave before I defend us further." They retreated through the back door, moving quickly across the yard toward the side gate. I followed at a safe distance, rifle still at the ready, watching as they headed for a black SUV parked on the street. As they approached their vehicle, the head of security turned back toward the house, pulling his handgun from its holster. "This is not over," he shouted, raising the weapon toward me. Instinct took over. I raised the rifle and fired repeatedly, aiming not at the men but at their vehicle. Bullets tore into the engine block, the tires, the driver's side door. Glass shattered as the headlights exploded. The sound of gunfire echoed through the previously quiet neighborhood, triggering lights in surrounding homes. The security officers dove for cover behind the disabled vehicle, both now with weapons drawn. I maintained my position at the edge of my property, the rifle trained on the vehicle, preventing them from either advancing back toward my home or effectively using their car for escape. "The police are on their way," I called out. "Drop your weapons now." Instead, they fired several shots in my direction, bullets splintering the wooden fence near where I stood. I dropped to a crouch, keeping the rifle aimed at their position. More lights came on in neighboring houses. I could hear windows opening, voices calling out. "He is defending his home," someone shouted from across the street. "Those security guys broke in." "I am recording everything," called another voice, likely Mrs. Peterson from her second-floor window. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The security officers looked at each other, panic evident even from a distance. They attempted to open their vehicle doors, but the damage to the locking mechanisms from my shots had rendered them inoperable. They were trapped, exposed, as police vehicles turned onto our street, lights flashing. "Drop your weapons, police!" came the authoritative command as 4 officers took positions behind their vehicles, guns drawn. For a moment, I feared the corrupt connection between these fake officers and local law enforcement would lead to my arrest rather than theirs. But the police approached the situation professionally, ordering everyone to disarm. I placed my rifle on the ground slowly, identifying myself as the homeowner. "These men broke into my home," I called out to the police. "They threatened my son, who is inside with 2 broken arms from their previous assault. I have security footage of the break-in." The security officers attempted to claim HOA authority, but their masks, pry bar, and the obvious damage to my back door told a different story. When officers found their weapons were unregistered, and one of them had an outstanding warrant, the situation clarified quickly. As they were handcuffed and placed in police vehicles, neighbors emerged from their homes, many in pajamas and robes, watching with a mixture of shock and vindication. Several approached the police, offering their own statements about intimidation and threats from these same men. The head of security glared at me through the police car window as an officer took my statement. "You have made the biggest mistake of your life," he mouthed silently. But looking around at the neighbors now speaking freely to police, at the security cameras that had captured everything, at the broken door that proved the home invasion, I knew the mistake had been theirs. They had believed their false authority would protect them forever. They had believed fear would keep everyone silent. They had been wrong. Dawn broke over our neighborhood with a different quality of light than I had seen in months. Police vehicles still lined the street, crime scene tape cordoned off areas of my front yard and driveway, and forensic technicians photographed bullet casings and impact points. Yet despite the chaos, there was a sense of liberation in the air. I sat on the front porch with Jason, who had insisted on coming outside after the paramedics had checked him and confirmed his casts had not been damaged in the commotion. We watched in silence as neighbors gathered in small groups, talking openly for the first time about their experiences with the fraudulent security team. Mr. Mitchell, a tall woman in a county sheriff's uniform, approached us. "I am Detective Garcia with the county sheriff's department. We are taking over this investigation from local police due to potential conflicts of interest." I nodded, not entirely surprised. "Thank you for coming. Based on preliminary evidence and witness statements, this appears to be a clear case of self-defense during a home invasion," she continued. "Your security footage has been extremely helpful. We will need formal statements from both of you, but that can wait until later today." As she spoke, more official vehicles arrived, unmarked police cars, and what appeared to be federal agents. Detective Garcia explained the situation had escalated beyond a simple home invasion. "We have been tracking complaints about private security companies operating beyond their legal authority in several communities," she said. "Your evidence connects directly to individuals we have been investigating for months. This incident has given us probable cause for warrants we have been unable to secure until now." Throughout the morning, I watched from my porch as law enforcement descended on the HOA president's house. Richard Blackwell was led away in handcuffs, still wearing a bathrobe, his face a mask of indignant rage. Similar scenes played out at several other homes belonging to board members. By afternoon, news crews had arrived, broadcasting live from our street. The detective returned with updates that confirmed our suspicions. Blackwell and his associates had established fake security companies in 3 different suburban communities, using intimidation and extortion to collect fraudulent fines. The money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, had been funneled through shell companies back to the conspirators. We found evidence that several local police officers were receiving payments to ignore complaints, Detective Garcia explained. Those officers have been suspended pending investigation. The county prosecutor is preparing charges including racketeering, extortion, assault, impersonation of law enforcement, and corruption. Later that day, neighbors began appearing at our door, first individually, then in groups. They brought food, offers of help with Jason's care, and most importantly, their stories. What emerged was a pattern of systematic intimidation that had held our entire community hostage. Mrs. Henderson had been threatened with exposure of her son's minor drug arrest if she did not pay fabricated fines. The Rodriguez family had photographs of their children taken as implied threats. Mr. Collins had been physically pushed down his own stairs during an inspection when he questioned an arbitrary violation. A community meeting was organized in the park where Jason had been assaulted. Over 100 residents attended, many sharing experiences they had previously kept secret out of fear. A lawyer specializing in class action lawsuits offered to represent all affected homeowners against the fraudulent HOA board and security company. There is significant insurance coverage and personal assets that can be recovered, he explained to the gathered crowd. While it cannot undo the harm done, it can provide some measure of justice and help rebuild the community. During the weeks that followed, our neighborhood underwent a transformation. The old HOA board was dissolved by court order. A new, transparent board was elected with clear limitations on authority and spending. Security cameras were installed in common areas, controlled by the community rather than any private company. We created a neighborhood watch program consisting of actual residents who knew each other. Jason began physical therapy, the healing process slow but steady. His classmates organized a schedule to help him with schoolwork, and teachers came to our house for special tutoring sessions. The baseball team made him an honorary coach, setting up a special seat in the dugout where he could still participate in the season. The legal process moved with surprising speed once federal authorities became involved. Blackwell and 8 associates were indicted on multiple felony charges. The evidence was overwhelming: bank records, falsified documents, witness testimony, and security camera footage telling a clear story of organized criminal activity disguised as homeowners association enforcement. 3 months after the incident, a certified letter arrived from the prosecutor's office. It officially cleared me of any wrongdoing in the shooting, confirming the self-defense determination. Attached was a letter from the county sheriff thanking me for helping to break open a case that had affected multiple communities. The civil lawsuit proceeded on a parallel track. The discovery process revealed the full extent of the corruption, nearly $500,000 extorted from residents through fraudulent fines and increased HOA fees over just 18 months. The settlement, when it finally came, provided substantial compensation to all affected homeowners and established a trust fund for community improvements. 6 months after the attack, Jason had his casts removed. His arms, thin and pale, would require continued therapy to regain full strength and range of motion. The doctors were optimistic but clear that some limitations might be permanent. His pitching arm would likely never return to its former capability. As we drove home from the hospital that day, Jason looked out the window at our neighborhood. New playground equipment was being installed in the park, paid for by the settlement fund. Neighbors waved as we passed, a simple gesture that would have been unthinkable during the months of fear. "I am sorry you cannot pitch anymore," I said, glancing at him as I drove. Jason was quiet for a moment. "I am thinking about coaching," he finally replied, "or maybe sports medicine. There are other ways to stay in the game. That evening, we sat on our front porch, something we had rarely done during the time of the security patrols. Neighbors walked by, stopping to chat without the nervous glances up and down the street that had once been common. Children played freely in yards and on sidewalks without parents hovering anxiously nearby. The settlement check had arrived earlier that week, enough to cover all of Jason's medical expenses, with additional funds set aside for college. Money that represented acknowledgement of wrongdoing but could never truly compensate for what had been taken from him, from all of us. "Do you think it was worth it?" Jason asked suddenly, standing up to them. I considered the question carefully. I think about that moment in the hospital, seeing both your arms in casts, knowing they hurt you to send me a message. I was terrified and furious and heartbroken all at once. I paused, watching a group of children riding bikes freely down the street. But then I look around now. I see people living without fear in their own homes. I see a community that found its voice. I see you finding new dreams to replace the ones that were taken. I met his eyes. So yes, it was worth it. Not the price you paid, nothing could be worth that. But the fight itself, standing against people who use fear as a weapon, always worth it. Jason nodded slowly. When I go to college, I think I want to study law, maybe help other communities stand up to people like that. As the sun set over our neighborhood, casting long shadows across lawns where intimidating vehicles had once patrolled, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for too long. The scars would remain in Jason's limited mobility, in the lingering caution with which some neighbors still carried themselves, in my own heightened vigilance. But beneath those scars was something stronger than before, a community that had faced corruption together and reclaimed its home. The fake HOA cops had broken my son's arms, but they had failed to break his spirit. And when they came for us in the darkness, they discovered that protecting my family was a line I would not allow anyone to cross. Sometimes justice requires more than following established channels. Sometimes it requires standing your ground, even when the cost seems impossibly high. The path to our neighborhood's liberation had been paved with my son's broken bones and my own crossed boundaries. But as I sat beside him on our porch, watching him slowly regain the ability to move his fingers without pain, I knew we had found something that Blackwell and his thugs could never understand. True authority comes not from intimidation and fear, but from the courage to stand against it.